This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea expands its highest level heat alert to cover all of Seoul as the capital faces historic temperatures beyond 38 degrees Celsius. Now, Japan says defense is no longer just about security. It's also an economic strategy. Its latest white paper says that military investment can fuel innovation and growth amid mounting regional security challenges. Also, Toyota lifts its profit forecast, underscoring the weak yen, despite recent intervention by Tokyo and Washington to support the currency. And HSBC restarts a $1 billion buyback after better-than-expected first-half profit, buoyed by its Asia business. Also tonight, reversing the rural exodus in China. How one dead-end village became a draw card for young entrepreneurs. South Korean authorities have placed the entire city of Seoul under the highest heat alert, with temperatures across the capital expected to exceed 38 degrees Celsius. President Lee Jae Myung is urging his cabinet to treat the heat wave as a national disaster. At least 16 people have died from the extreme heat since May. But temperature records have also been broken 3 times over the past week. Mr. Lee called on officials to step up measures to support those who are vulnerable.
극한 기후의 일상화에 대응해서 재난 시스템을 근본적으로 재설계하는 노력도 필요합니다. 폭염에 대한 범국가적 위험 인식을 한층 더 높여야 할 때입니다.
The severe heat is taking a toll on public health and water supplies. More than 2,000 people have been treated for heat-related illnesses, and authorities are warning that around 100,000 residents in South Gyeongsang province could face water shortages if dry conditions continue. And I've got CNA senior correspondent Lee Jae-myung. She joins us live now from Seoul. Yoon-suk, this heat, just how bad is it in Seoul right now?
Oh, it is really bad. I mean, the capital, Seoul, I think, is really feeling this full force of this heat wave. You know, even during the evenings, temperatures are staying in the mid-30s Celsius, and even now it's about 36 degrees outside. And with this high humidity, it just feels more intense. And I think South Koreans are just not used to this kind of weather, and we haven't seen the temperatures go this high in the past. And, you know, especially for people like the delivery riders who are spending hours on motorcycles, or we see the construction workers who are out there continuing to work under the scorching sun. And also many elderly people collecting cardboard to make a living are still out on the streets despite this, what South Koreans are calling dangerous conditions. Now, the extreme heat is also disrupting everyday life across the capital, Seoul. Right now, it is the baseball season here in South Korea, but here in Seoul today, at the Chamsil Baseball Stadium, a professional baseball game has been delayed after the temperature measured on the field apparently exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. Now, it is the first time a baseball game has been postponed here in South Korea because of weather conditions. And also, the worst part is there are no signs that it is going to be cooling down anytime soon. And, you know, this hot and humid weather here in the capital, Seoul, and throughout South Korea, you know, is expected to continue for several more days to come. And, you know, it might even last until the end of this month.
So, Yoon-suk, the most vulnerable, which includes those delivery riders, the elderly people, as you've mentioned. So what are authorities doing to protect these people?
Well, the Seoul government says that it is increasing support for those most at risk. And, you know, this includes more cooling centers for them to be able to go in somewhere and cool themselves down, more checks on the elderly residents, and more help for people who have to work or spend time outdoors, especially for the elderly people who are living alone or those without strong support networks, where welfare officials are being asked to check on them more often, more closely, and make sure that they have access access to water, cooling facilities, and medical help if needed. Also, authorities are focusing on outdoor workers, including those construction workers and the delivery riders, because they are among the people most exposed to this extreme heat right now. Also, South Korean companies are being urged to make sure that the workers take enough breaks, provide cooling areas where possible, and avoid the most dangerous hours of the day when temperatures peak. Now, the Seoul mayor, Oh Se-yeon, says that this heat wave is a warning of a bigger challenge ahead. And he says that extreme weather events are becoming more common and that South Korea needs to rethink how it prepares for these kind of crises. Let's listen to what he had to say.
예, 지금 폭염이 기승을 부리고 있습니다. 이제 서울도 폭염이 매우 심각한 상황인데요. 이럴 때 제일 걱정이 되시는 분들이 뜨겁게 달궈진 아스팔트 위를 달리실 수밖에 없는 배달 라이더분들, 또 이 폭염 속에서도 건설 현장에서 건설 업무에 종사하시는 건설 근로자분들, 그리고 이곳 폐지 줍는 어르신들.
And so I think, the bigger question now is how the Seoul city and also the South Korean government are going to be preparing for a future where this extreme weather may really become the new reality here in South Korea.
While you try to stay cool yourself, Yoon-suk, many thanks for that update on South Korea's heat wave. CNA senior correspondent Lim Yoon-suk in Seoul. Now, meantime, parts of Asia are also bracing for the arrival of Typhoon Dolphin. It's been downgraded to a Category 3 storm, but the Japanese Met Agency says it could still bring about destructive weather. Now, Dolphin, as it is, has already hit parts of Japan's Ogasawara Islands. Authorities are warning residents to stay indoors as strong winds and high waves lash the area. And the storm is expected to move west, with rough seas forecast for Okinawa from tomorrow. Now, as it continues westwards, it could weaken further and make landfall as a Category 1 or 2 typhoon. Taiwan is expecting to feel the wrath of Typhoon Dolphin by Friday. Many parts of the region are expecting thundery showers and strong winds. Typhoon Dolphin could also dictate just how long South Korea swelters under a heat wave. And that's because typhoons reshape wind patterns across the region. If the storm moves away from the Korean peninsula, it can create areas of warm sinking air, trapping heat over the region. But a path closer to South Korea could provide some relief, bringing strong winds, rain, and greater cloud cover. Japan has released its annual defense white paper, again voicing concerns over China's military activities. It also outlined the changing security environment and Tokyo's response. CNA's senior correspondent Michio Ishida tells us more.
China featured prominently in Japan's defense white paper, which listed what it called events of deep concern, such as the presence of Chinese warships close to Japan, as well as Chinese military drills around the Taiwan Strait. It noted a military buildup by Beijing and Pyongyang, as well as the strengthening of ties between Beijing and Moscow and Pyongyang. The paper also analyzed new styles of combat across the world. In the Russia-Ukraine war, it pointed out what it said was a massive volume of unmanned assets. It also highlighted the combination of bombs and missiles deployed and the use of AI to control drones, help analyze information, and renew combat strategies. Japan itself is developing a coastal defense system that makes use of standoff missiles and a range of low-cost unmanned assets for deterrence. It also wants to strengthen its domestic production capacity and technological base for defense equipment, such as by cooperating with private firms to expand dual-use capabilities. For the first time, the white paper also emphasized Japan's defense cooperation with like-minded countries other than its only formal security ally, the U.S. The white paper warned the rule of law and a free and open world order are facing challenges. Tokyo plans to revise its 3 key national security documents this year as it seeks to strengthen its defense capabilities. The white paper aims to outline the evolving security environment and its response to the public. Michio Ishida-Sine, Tokyo.
The U.S. will reportedly close 5 foreign missions in a rare downsizing of America's global diplomatic footprint, and they include 2 in Asia. And that's according to a Reuters report, which said that Congress was notified last week. Now, U.S. consulates in Indonesia's Medan City and Nagoya, Japan, are said to be on the list. The others are in Canada, Cameroon, and Grenada. Preparations to shut down apparently started when the Trump administration took power early last year. At the time, U.S. media reported nearly 30 missions were targeted to cut federal spending. Reuters reports say that the State Department did not confirm the closures, but said that it would ensure the diplomatic footprint was efficient and effective. The report says that Democrats and some officials fear that shutting missions could undermine American leadership and leave a dangerous vacuum for China and Russia to fill. Well, North Korea has accused the U.S. of tarnishing its image after the U.S., along with 10 Asian and European allies, issued a statement warning against employing IT workers from the country. The statement says that skilled workers from North Korea are using AI and false identities to obtain remote jobs. It alleges that the employees then send money back to government agencies in North Korea, helping to fund the country's ballistic and nuclear missile programs. Pyongyang currently faces a slew of international sanctions over its weapons and nuclear programs. The North Korean Foreign Ministry, in the meantime, has dismissed the joint warning as a political accusation, saying it's unfounded. It added that it was the U.S. who posed the real cyber threat, given its militarization of cyberspace and its monopoly on resources. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, signs of a slowdown in retail investment in single-stock leveraged ETFs in South Korea. Plus, energy giants' profits soar amid supply disruptions and higher energy prices from the Middle East conflict. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight, and you are just in time for business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, it looks like restructuring at global lender HSBC, apparently that is paying off?
Yes, indeed. HSBC's push to simplify its operations under CEO Georges Elhedery is paying dividends, and he's even raised the target for cost savings this financial year. HSBC announcing the resumption of its share buybacks up to $1 billion after recording second quarter earnings that beat estimates. Revenue in that period came in at around $19 billion. That's up 8% on year. Net adjusted income was at $9.8 billion, up 28%. The relaunch of the share buyback follows a decision last year to pause stock repurchases for around 3 quarters after it took Hong Kong lender Hang Seng Bank private. HSBC says it expects to complete the stock buyback before the next quarter results. It also announced a second interim dividend of 10 cents per share. HSBC shares slid in Hong Kong, but the stock is up around 34% year to date. Turning to the forex markets now, the Japanese yen losing ground, now hovering just under 158 against the greenback. It's already losing steam after a rare US-Japan joint yen buying intervention last week. Tokyo and Washington vowed to take further action if needed. But analysts see little room for gains beyond the 155 per dollar level. Analysis of BOJ data indicates that Japan may have spent as much as $34 billion buying yen last Friday. The US Treasury also reportedly sold euros for yen to support the battered currency. The coordinated action has also pushed Japan's government bond yields up as markets price in higher probability of an earlier Bank of Japan rate hike. For CNA Explains, Elizabeth Neo looks at why the U.S. got involved this time.
The interesting part about this yen intervention is how the U.S. joined in. It didn't do so just to help Japan. It was helping itself too. This is how it works. To support the yen, Tokyo buys its own currency and sells US dollars. That means it needs a lot of dollars. And where will it get that? Well, Japan is the largest foreign holder of US government bonds, with more than $1 trillion of it as part of its foreign exchange reserves. So it could sell those US treasuries. But that's something Washington wants to avoid, because if Japan sells a lot of US treasuries, bond prices could fall and yields would rise. Higher yields make it more expensive for the US government to borrow money, and US borrowing costs are already elevated. So US involvement helped reduce the risk of Japan having to rely more heavily on its own dollar reserves, also helping shield US financial markets from additional pressure. Plus, there is the issue of trade. President Trump has repeatedly criticized Japan's weak currency. He said it gave Japanese manufacturers an unfair advantage. Supporting the yen helps reduce that imbalance. President Trump also called the move a signal of friendship.
Because we have a good relationship with Japan. We're very strong, very, very strong financially. And they are, they have a weakening yen, and they wanted a little bit of help.
But analysts say intervention alone is not enough to help support the yen in the long term. For that to happen, they say the Bank of Japan needs to narrow its interest rate gap with the U.S., a move out of the hands of American and Japanese finance officials. For CNA Explains, I'm Elizabeth Neo.
Martin Schulz, chief economist at Fujitsu, explains what signals investors will be looking out for to restore their confidence in the currency.
Investors are now, of course, testing the market, but I think they will be very, very careful. I mean, you can bet against the Bank of Japan, and Mr. Besant has won a ton of money by doing that in his earlier career as a hedge fund manager. He still seems to have the mindset of a hedge fund manager because this entire operation is going into that direction. But on his mind clearly seems to be that there has been a significant change on the Japan side. And what investors now need to see that what Mr. Besant already sees is that there has a change of mindset. And that requires that the Bank of Japan is increasing interest rates in September. That's earlier than they have been planning before, that they follow up on in December. That means 2 interest rate steps. That would be significant tightening of monetary policy, plus an intervention. Buying yen back means that monetary policy is already tighter. When investors are seeing that during August and see, okay, the train is going into that direction, a lot of carry trades will become much more dangerous. They are very sensitive to small changes.
Now, Toyota has raised its full-year profit forecast by 13%, helped by the weak yen. That's days after Tokyo and Washington moved to support the beleaguered currency. The upbeat revision comes despite a drop in first quarter earnings. Operating income for the 3 months ended June fell 8.8% on year to $6.7 billion. It's the 5th straight quarterly drop on slumping sales in China, even as revenue rose 10%. The world's largest automaker now expects operating profit of $21.6 billion for the financial year ending March. It also announced plans to buy back up to $6.3 billion worth of shares, citing strong cash reserves and a focus on improving capital efficiency. Toyota says earnings remain resilient despite the Middle East conflict, supported by the weaker yen, cost cuts, and stronger hybrid sales. A weaker yen boosts the value of overseas earnings when converted into the Japanese currency, while making exports more price competitive. Consumer electronics giant Sony also raised its annual forecast last week, also helped by strong video game sales and the weak yen. The outlook hike and the announcement of a share buyback failing to boost its stock, which ended the day down 1.5%. Japan's food exports reached a record high in the first half of this year, led by products such as green tea and yellowtail fish. Shipments of agricultural, forestry and fishery products rose nearly 11% from a year earlier to nearly 900 billion yen. That's about $5.7 billion. Green tea exports jumped more than 84% on year, fueled by the global matcha boom, while shipments of yellowtail fish that surged 69%. Exports to the US, Japan's biggest market, rose by more than 15%. And shipments also increased to all of Japan's top 10 markets, including China, despite Beijing maintaining its partial ban on Japanese seafood imports. Tokyo says the growth reflects rising interest in Japanese cuisine, as well as greater awareness generated by tourism. Japan is aiming to raise annual agricultural, forestry and fishery exports to nearly $32 billion by 2030. Now, trading in leverage funds linked to South Korea's biggest chipmakers has fallen sharply after regulators moved to curb speculative investment. Volume in its largest single stock exchange traded fund tracking SK Hynix dropped to its lowest level in 2 months. A similar fund tied to Samsung Electronics also recorded its weakest trading activity since its launch in May, while loans used to finance share purchases have fallen to their lowest level since January. The slowdown follows new restrictions introduced by authorities. Now, investors must now hold at least 30 million won in cash. That's about $21,000 in order to trade leveraged ETFs. Now, that is 3 times the previous requirement. New listings of these products have also been suspended. Now, South Korea's benchmark Kospi remains up nearly 50% this year, but trading was halted an unprecedented 4 times in July. That's amid the extreme market volatility. China tech stocks are seeing sharp swings with a recent sell-off driven by a global correction in AI-related shares. Domestic investors have also been unwinding leveraged positions over the past month, fueling the worst ever rout in the tech-heavy Star 50 index. Margin trading in China has continued to decline. According to financial data provider Wind, the value of shares bought with borrowed money has fallen 14%, from a record $445 billion in late June to around $383 billion as of Friday. The selling has been concentrated in tech stocks listed on the Shanghai and Shenzhen bourses. The blue chip CSI 300 index is now about 9% below its late June peak. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Tech Index has also lagged behind. Now, Shanghai's tech-heavy Star 50 index has surrendered much of a rally that lifted it by some 70% between April and July. It recorded a 26% slump last month. That's the worst monthly performance since its inception. Analysts say the unwinding of leverage bets could add to market uncertainty and complicate Beijing's efforts to stabilize its domestic stock markets. Last month, China's securities regulator pledged to maintain market stability after a 2-week sell-off wiped out about $1.48 trillion in market value. Meantime, oil prices rebounding from a plunge in the previous session, fueled by concerns that Middle East supply remains at risk as a diplomatic resolution to the war seems unlikely. Brent crude is currently up 2.51% in late Asian trade, $85.87. U.S. market, a West Texas intermediate, up by 0.1 to $80.44 an ounce. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has constrained global shipments, pushing Brent crude past $100 a barrel for much of the past 3 months. And while elevated costs for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuels have increased financial strain on drivers as well as airlines worldwide, major oil companies are reporting massive windfalls. BP's profits more than doubled to $5.73 billion for the April to June period, while Saudi Aramco, the world's biggest oil exporter, reported a 44% surge in net profit. They are the latest in a string of energy giants to report bumper profits as the war roils markets. And that is the latest in business.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Right, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, China's People's Liberation Army touts the use of AI to plan and coordinate mass airstrikes as it marks its 99th anniversary over the weekend. What message is Beijing trying to send? We ask an expert. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea expands its highest level heat alert to cover all of Seoul as the capital faces historic temperatures of 38 degrees and above. Toyota lifts its profit forecast, underscoring the weak yen despite recent intervention by Tokyo and Washington to support the currency. And Japan says defense is no longer just about security, it's also an economic strategy. Its latest white paper says that military investment can fuel innovation and growth amid mounting regional security challenges. China's People's Liberation Army marked its 99th anniversary just last Saturday. The Red Army started as a lightly equipped revolutionary force back in 1927, but now and today the PLA is one of the world's largest and most technologically advanced militaries. That transformation began in the 1950s, shortly after the founding of the People's Republic, and its participation in the Korean War exposed weaknesses in logistics, equipment, and air power. Well, China then turned to the Soviet Union for weapons, training, and military doctrine, laying the foundation for a modern army. And another turning point came in 1991. China's military closely studied the US-led Gulf War and concluded that success in future conflicts would depend on precision weapons, advanced communications, and information dominance. Now, military reforms accelerated under President Xi Jinping. China reorganized the PLA into theater commands, strengthened joint operations, and launched sweeping anti-corruption campaigns across the armed forces. Now, speaking on the occasion of the anniversary, Mr. Xi called for faster integration of artificial intelligence, unmanned technologies, and cyber information systems, saying combat effectiveness must remain the military's overriding priority. And the push reflects China's longer-term military ambitions. As the PLA approaches its centenary next year, Beijing is accelerating efforts to build an AI-enabled military system, while continuing reforms aimed at strengthening combat readiness and projecting greater capability across the region. For more analysis, let's bring in Ina Tangen, a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation and chairman of Asia Narratives. Well, thanks once again, Ina, for joining us this evening. Let's just first start with the messaging coming out of this year's PLA anniversary, where AI, intelligence, warfare, combat readiness, that was front and center of its messaging. What does that tell us about how Beijing sees its future security environment and of course, the broader message it's sending to the region and beyond?
Well, China is obviously learning a lot right now from what is happening in both Ukraine and also in the Gulf. They see that communications, information dominance is absolutely crucial. The U.S. ability to locate and destroy basically almost the entire governance of Iran was incredible. It's not something that China would want to do, but it shows exactly what kind of capabilities the U.S. has, and China has to respond. You know, there are two parts, Ateli, to modern warfare, three, including experience. But really, it's this information area. How quickly can you understand and also deploy your forces? And then how can you support them? As the U.S. has shown, having all the high-tech weapons, if you can't supply the ammunition, is not as effective as you want, and it doesn't prepare you for long-term success.
But I know, of course, how that message is received is a different matter, because China insists that, a stronger PLA is meant to preserve peace through deterrence. Yet, from the South China Sea to concerns of its expanding nuclear arsenal, many countries are seeing the opposite. And why do you think that there's such a gap in perceptions?
Well, the gap is due to the United States keeps pushing China. You've had these AUKUS, you have the Quad. They're all saying, okay, we are forming these defensive alliances against China. The nuclear submarines with the Australians. I mean, these are all aimed. There's this fear that China somehow is going to invade Australia. It's ridiculous, as I know, but the majority of Australians feel this way. Why? Because of the narratives that are being spread out by the international press that China is the aggressive nation, when it's in fact the United States with over 800 bases and a force that is a projection force. China doesn't have that. It has one base in Djibouti, which is mixed in with a bunch of bases with European countries. There's no way that it could be used in any kind of operational warfare. It's only used to resupply anti-piracy. So yes, within the area, especially places like Philippines and Japan, they've kind of taken up this narrative and said China's a threat, but it hasn't been. It hasn't attacked anybody. It's very defensive about what it has, and that's the whole point of its military. It's aimed at defending China. It's not projecting any kind of aggression. And right now, the irony here is that Japan wants to project its ability to defend places like, quote, Taiwan. That is unusual. It was Japan who started all of the troubles back in World War II and Asia before World War II with its aggressive campaign of colonialization in Korea and China. That was always about projecting power to defend Japan. We have the same type of situation. So people should be wary of these kind of narratives which are being spun that somehow China is the aggressor when it's the U.S. who has this containment program and over 200 bases surrounding China.
So I want to pick up on this massive anti-corruption drive that's still ongoing, even as China is pushing ahead with its military modernization. How should we understand, with all these leadership purges at such a critical stage of China's military modernization?
Well, the first thing you understand is no one is protected. Lee Jae-myung was a childhood friend. They grew up literally next door. He trusted him to reform the PLA starting in 2015, as you were saying earlier. He was the one who was active in selecting the people who ran the rocket force. It turned out that they were corrupt. They were selling promotions, doing all the things that a modern military force cannot afford to have, especially with a one-party system where corruption cannot be tolerated because there's no one else to make sure that the government is running well. You lose your ability to be truthful with your people if you're in fact corrupt. So she has been absolutely dead on certain that he is going to get rid of this. No one is protected, and he will do what is necessary to make sure that the force and the people become before people's greed.
Now, Anna, before I let you go, I want to touch on Japan's defense paper that was released today, arguing that basically military spending is not just about security, but it's also about economic prosperity. So all of this coming just after PLA's anniversary showcase, I just want to ask you, are we going to be seeing the emergence of this new security race, where economic strategy and defense policy are fused, and how is that going to impact the Indo-Pacific?
Well, yeah, normally I would say yes, but it was Japan who was yesterday asking the United States to intercede because the yen had fallen to a 40-year low. The Japanese economy isn't going well. I think this is just kind of a stopgap method of saying, hey, look, military is good. But the fact is, it isn't. Investment in a bomb yields nothing. If you invest in a road, it can transport things, people, goods, services. But if you put it into military, it only has one use, and that's to kill people. So I don't think it's sustainable from Japan's point of view, but it doesn't mean that there aren't fears being spread, especially by the United States, about what China, quote, could do as opposed to what it has done.
Right. And the impact on the Indo-Pacific then?
In the Pacific, I mean, you have situations like the Philippines, but that's subject to politics. Whoever is in office seems to kind of wag the tail. Sometimes it's going towards the U.S. side. Sometimes it's closer to ASEAN and trying to be neutral. The fact is, most nations do not want to choose sides. They don't want to be, some sort of proxy war or part of a kind of a pawn in a big game. They want to stay away from that, and hopefully they will be able to do it. I mean, China doesn't insist on ideology. but the U.S. does. The question in the U.S. are either for us or against us. In China, the question is, do you want to trade or not?
Many thanks for insights on East Asia tonight. Ina Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation and Chairman of Asia Narratives. Right, on that note, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, young people in rural China have been moving to big cities in search of better opportunities, but one Zhejiang village is reversing that trend. And Malaysia's Transport Minister steps down as Negeri Sembilan's Democratic Action Party chief, following his defeat in last weekend's state elections. A Malaysian Transport Minister, Anthony Loke, is stepping down as the Negeri Sembilan Democratic Action Party chief following his defeat in the recent state election. He will remain as DAP's National Secretary General. Mr. Loke made the announcement late last night at a media conference in Kuala Lumpur. He said he felt it was the right time to hand the state leadership to a new generation, as he had held the post for 22 years. The party now faces another crucial test on 16th of August at a special Congress. Some 4,000 of its members will decide if DAP ministers should continue serving in Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's cabinet.
We will stand guided by the decision of our delegates. So when the delegates make their decision, after 16th of August, then it's clearer for us how do we move. Do they want us to stay in the government, continue to fight within the government, or we stay out of the government?
James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania, explained what experts see as the main driver behind the DAP's defeat and what it signals about how voters are feeling.
It is quite clear to me that the DAP collectively as a party is not willing to give up on Pakatan Harapan. A lot of the DAP people I spoke to blame the current crisis squarely on the shoulders of Anwar Ibrahim. They said that when he came into power, he was supposed to undertake a series of reforms. Rather than taking reforms, he became to move to the right and started pandering to the Islamic and the conservative forces in Malaysia. And this was, in direct contradiction of the people who voted for him. As many of the viewers know, right, 95% of the Chinese community and probably 80% plus of the Indian community supported Pakatan Harapan in the last general election, hoping that Anwar will come in, clean up the system, and provide or undertake real reforms to Malaysia's political system. And when that did happen, people are really, really disappointed. So you can see, right, in terms of the Chinese voting pattern, it is quite clear that a substantial number of Chinese in both Johor and Negeri Sembilan decided not to vote this time around. In terms of the non-Malay community, the signal was very clear. Anwar Ibrahim must correct himself, move back to the reformasi movement rather than the reformati movement that he's leading now. Secondly, the message saying was Malay unity. It is quite clear that with UMNO lining up with PAS, they have discovered the so-called secret sauce to Malay votes. If they can come in together, right, they are almost unbeatable in the Malay areas. So that's the reason why I call it a Malay tsunami. If Anwar is not careful, his entire government will be swept by the Malay tsunami in the upcoming general elections.
Well, Mr. Loke's shock defeat and resignation comes as Malaysia's ruling coalition suffered tough losses in the past 3 state elections. In Johor, Pakatan Harapan slumped from 12 seats to just 8, and the setback was even bigger in Negeri Sembilan, with several high-profile defeats. Both states fell to Barisan Nasional, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's partner in the federal government. CNA's Arnold Gay discussed the results with our correspondent, Melissa Goh.
Mel, how would you gauge unity at this time within Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's coalition?
For the longest time, we've been asking Zahid this question, and he is the number 2, of Prime Minister Anwar's government. He's still the Deputy Prime Minister. How are they going to work together, given that they are enemies at the state levels in each elections? Temperatures keep rising, right? Putting pressure on them. How do they work? But they said that they will be very professional. They will be functioning government at the federal level. They can sit down and still work on policies, but analysts are saying that it's going to be harder and harder for them to negotiate. For example, substantive policies. How do you have the cohesiveness to decide on substantive policy matters? And that's important for the running of the country. How can Prime Minister Anwar's unity government functions under this kind of circumstances, which state elections one after another, and the animosity on the ground is building up? It's just not going to work in the long run. Not to mention that Prime Minister Anwar is more than 80 years old, is 80 years old now, and on campaign trail, he's been saying that he's getting old, his wife is getting old, they just want to be remembered as leaders that love the people and the people love them back. He's already sending this kind of messages. And you don't know where it's going, but it is, wearing him down. Yeah. This whole state elections with 4 or 5 speaking engagement every day, every night, and it's a 2-week campaigning, one after another. It's going to be taxing on us too.
I guess.
And you can catch the rest of that episode in our podcast, CNA Correspondent, available on our website, CNA or Me Listen apps, as well as on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Now, for decades, young people in rural China leave their hometowns for big cities in search of better opportunities. But one village in Zhejiang province is actually seeing the reverse. Nearly half the residents of Lizhu are under 35, and the village is thriving, as Crystal Chia finds out.
这里就是我以前的老房子。我的2个儿子呢都在这里的。那个时候呢，地面很潮湿的，破破烂烂。这里就是一个粪坑，那边是一个猪栏，这里呢是一个国灶。
Retired teacher Fang Haotong was born right here 77 years ago, when this trendy cafe was an old family home. He now lives about a 10-minute walk away and spends his time farming, cooking meals with his wife, and chatting with the tenant who rents part of his home for her eatery business.
我们房子里基本上就是首先是通电呐，搞路面呐，路面比以前好，交通比以前方便。我们那个村子以前村子只有一条路。我认为呢，这个年轻人他能够自行下乡来创业，也是很好的。 也说明他思想成就于不去依赖发工资，自己出来搞创业，为国家做点贡献。
Lizhu is a hotspot for domestic tourists and a model for China's rural revitalisation. But it wasn't always this way. Lizhu used to have a nickname, Water Buffalo Horn Village. The way the horn tapers to a point was a metaphor for how this village had dead-end prospects. It was filled with run-down factories and abandoned farmhouses as its young people left. But that's all changed now. The village has a total population of about 850, and nearly half are 35 or younger. 340 are young entrepreneurs who have opened new businesses in the village, generating about 70 million yuan in revenue a year. That's $10.4 million, about double that of other so-called creative villages in China. Lizhu native Grace Fang used to work the 996 schedule at an internet firm in Beijing, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. She now runs an incense shop from her grandmother's family home.
那假设如果说我做的并没有那么成功，或者说我在确实的创业的过程当中遇上了很多难题，跟我原来的设想的不一样等等，那我觉得我还是可以再回头。其实最大的挑战还是在于就是身边人的一些看法吧，特别是村里一些邻居啊，或者是一些爷爷奶奶，他们会觉得啊，你这么年轻，你在村里还是会不会有点虚度光阴的感觉？刚开始是这样的，但是现在的话就不会了，因为他们都知道我做的还不错，然后也非常的鼓励我。
Jingliu Yunyi was a school teacher in Hangzhou before she started a cafe in the village in 2024.
我觉得就是老师的工作虽然稳定，但是会 一眼望到头，就我知道我30年后我还在做什么事情。我想说，那我现在30岁刚开始，我想还有个10年的时间，可以让我去尝试我喜欢的东西，去尝试不一样的东西，也去试错，也可能是试对，那不一定。我就喜欢这样子的感觉。
President Xi Jinping announced China's rural revitalization strategy in 2017. With goals that included boosting farming output and reducing the urban-rural income gap. Fudan University's Professor Zhao Deyu says basic infrastructure was at the core of rural revitalization. But the focus in recent years has shifted to the running of the village.
那李祖村是个非常成功的一个案例，可是它的可复制性如何呢？
有的村庄全是做民宿，有的村庄是音乐村，有的村庄是棒球村，有的村庄是做研学教育的，各个村庄不可复制。有的时候看出来，有很多村庄它的特色其实是不可复制，但是它背后成功的动力呢，很多在不同的村庄里面，他们共通的就是它有特色。
He says there may be unwritten rules on who owns what resources in the village. And so policymakers must make sure that income generated from public spaces must be shared among residents. Different rural areas could also cannibalize each other's success.
不同地区之间会有竞争规划，政府的规划永远是有限度的。那你如果不能让它错位竞争的话，那么反正都同质化，那么就原来游客做轮文旅的，这个他都到这个地方来，发现隔壁周边都有了，他就分散掉了，那么最后大家都可能挣不到钱。
For Fang, he has never had any intention of moving to the city, but he has one wish. Li Zu is now flourishing and he wants to see demolished buildings rebuilt, places that were a part of his childhood. Crystal Chia, CNA, Li Zu Village, China.
Well, we're going to end our bulletin on some sports news and a big congratulations to breakout tennis star Alexandra Ela. Well, she's become the first player from the Philippines to win a WTA singles title after she stunned top seed Jessica Pegula in the Washington Open final. Now, the victory has propelled the 21-year-old up the world rankings to 20th place, maintaining her position as the highest-ranked Filipino in the tour's history. And it was certainly a tense final disrupted by lengthy weather delays, which saw the match played across 2 days. Well, the action resumed on Monday after being suspended on Sunday, with Ella trailing by a set but leading 2-1 in the second. She powered on to level the match before racing through the decider. The Filipina denying world number 3 Pegula from lifting the trophy for a third time with a 4-6, 6-4, 6-love victory. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. described the win as yet another historic achievement from Ella. And he praised the star for redefining the possibilities for Philippines tennis, inspiring young players to dream without limits. While the triumph extends Ella's winning streak against top 10 opponents to 5 matches. And that's all we've got for you for Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching and see you again tomorrow.